So, Anderson, we are getting our first look at the indictment, and with the proviso that we've not yet had a chance to read all of it, a couple of initial impressions. First of all, this is what we call a bare bones indictment, contrary to what we were discussing before. This essentially just lays out the statutory language, the name, the date of each offense, but there is not a lot of detail in what we're seeing at this moment.
Where the prosecutors has a very high bar. This prosecutor is indicting a former president of the United States. He better damn well prove it when they release that indictment today. But in court, you can't lie. You can lie in politics. You can lie on cable television. It's hard to lie in court.
That what District Attorney Bragg, assuming there isn't some rabbit that he's going to pull out of a hat, that the critics of his who say he has now just severely lowered the threshold.
I think you're seeing a couple of interesting things that emerge just with the release of these documents. Number one, the disappointment, I think, for us, of a bare bones indictment where it's just listing the charges in the statutes. But number two,
as opposed to telling a story that has a clear narrative.
Right.
How do you mean? What are the frailties? What are the weaknesses in this case?
Yeah, well, it's all the stuff we were kind of thinking we were going to see, but we weren't 100% sure. And again, I've barely had a chance to even skim the indictment, so I don't want to overstate it.
In terms of a case that's being brought against a former president, it's a little underwhelming. There's not more to it. There's not more violations, tax violations. There's not an incredible new set of facts that we didn't know about publicly.
We're going to see this play out, but I'm not sure, in my interpretation as a non-lawyer, this is quite as strong as I expected it to be.
David Irvin?
Yeah, listen, I mean, I've listened to Ellie and others say that if this was all that was there, this is going to be a really weak case. And I think that Joe Jacopini stood out there and said, if this defendant's name was not Donald Trump, this wouldn't be charged. And I have to believe that to be true. I've heard, if this is it, this is going to be weak. It's going to get dismissed. It's going to be a loser. I think Donald Trump's going to, tonight, is going to wave this in the air in Mar-a-Lago and say, they're after me. This is a witch hunt, and rightfully so.
What do you think of the indictment?
Well, speaking as someone who very strongly does not want Donald Trump to get the Republican presidential nomination, I'm extraordinarily distressed by this document. I think this is even weaker than I feared it would be.
Yeah, things are probably looking up after the former president read the indictment, which his team's going to interpret as thin. Even Mitt Romney, a constant detractor of the former president's, came out and said, you know, he's unfit to be president. I don't support him again. However, this is a weak case by the DA.
I worry. I mean, look, if this is the only pebble that gets thrown at Donald Trump, it's a very small pebble.
To talk to Van's point, I think it does injure what comes next, because the American public was watching today. People were tuned into their TVs. Everyone was watching. This is the first time ever. And they say, this is it? This is what they got? Everyone's been saying for weeks, if this is it, it's nothing. And now people are going to turn it off. And the next case that comes, it's going to be like the second impeachment, the third impeachment. It's just going to be more. It's going to be white noise, unfortunately, and people will tune out.
For this to take the historic step of being the first indictment of a former president, I think it's a bit disappointing how not strong it is, because it could, in the public's mind, make those other cases seem weaker and gives them has people call them into question.
And maybe it's all our own fault. You know, we've kind of whipped ourselves up over the last week about, you know, if they're bringing this case, it must be more than what we know is inside. And then we looked inside today and say, oh, it's just the same stuff we already knew. So what changed? You know, it's a 7-year-old case. In the DA's office, they called this the zombie case, because every time they put it away, it came back to life. Nobody wanted to go forward with it.
And Carrie, you say this case is a little underwhelming right now. Why?
Well, because, first of all, with respect to the facts that are alleged, there's nothing new in terms of the facts that we have learned through either the indictment or the accompanying statement of facts. It really all pertains back to the conduct that has been known for many, many years, almost 7 years now, regarding the payment that was made to Stormy Daniels.
So at this point, look, this is one of the most historic cases, arguably the most significant case right now in the American court system. It appears to be built on a pretty shaky foundation, because it's not clear what the larger crime is. And look, I've passed 2 bar exams. I'm having a little trouble following Alvin Bragg's argument here, so it's unclear if the average Manhattan juror will be able to follow it as well. And even if they can, even if they get a conviction, it still has to survive appeals, which can be difficult for cases built on novel legal theories.
So it's not clear what that theory is either. So look, I am a big believer in Alvin Bragg. He's a former colleague of mine. I believe in his capacity and his integrity, but I have real questions about this.
Alyssa, what do you expect to hear tonight?
Well, the former president's already kind of alluded to where he's going. He truthed out something suggesting, there's no there there. The biggest shock was how little there was in the indictment. So I think you're going to see a mix.
Truthed out is his social.
Yes, it's true. Yes.
I didn't know it was a verb, but
we're going to make it a verb. But I think he's going to be indignant, but I also think he's going to be a little celebratory. I mean, the reality is he has people like Mitt Romney, a foe of his, coming out and even defending him.
Look, I had hoped that there would be more in the indictment. And I think because it is so thin, it's giving aid and comfort to some of the worst people in American politics. I mean, it's like a rogues gallery of people just jumping up and down and being happy. I think that's not a good thing.
Well, I was disappointed that there wasn't more in the indictment in terms of laying out what the legal theory was with more precision. Today was supposed to be the big reveal where we would get that information. And to the extent that we have a sense of what the theory of the case is in terms of what are the crimes that would have been furthered or concealed by the falsification of records, it's not in the indictment. It's alluded to obliquely in the statement of facts.
If I had to characterize it, it's disappointment. I think everyone was hoping we would see more about the direction that they intend to take this prosecution. What is the legal theory that ties that very solid misdemeanor case, 34 counts of misdemeanors, to the intent to conceal another crime, which is what makes it a felony? It simply isn't there.
And we heard the former National Security Advisor to Donald Trump, John Bolton, not a fan of Donald Trump.
The opposite, right.
Expressing disappointment and saying he thinks that Donald Trump is guilty as sin of what's alleged, but this is not enough to go after a president with an indictment for the first time in American history.
As I think all of our parents have told us at one time or another, first impressions count, and legal sources said there was not enough detail. They thought that it was a mistake from a historic point of view. One source said to me, this is Donald Trump. You don't bring a knife to a gunfight. So we don't know what we don't know, but this was not.
Yeah.
Why the statutes that would make this a felony weren't even laid out clearly, and so that people could really see what laws they're alleging that he broke.
Let's listen in.
President Donald J.
The open threats by various countries of the use of nuclear weapons, something never mentioned or discussed by outside nations during the Trump administration, and which could very well lead under the Biden administration's leadership to an all-out nuclear World War III can happen. We're not very far away from it, believe it or not. This fake case was brought only to interfere with the upcoming 2024 election, and it should be dropped immediately. Who is harassing hundreds of my people day after day over the boxes hoax. You know, the boxes hoax, as we call it. Just so everyone knows, I come under what's known as the Presidential Records Act, which was designed and approved by Congress long ago just for this reason. They came up with a new one. This is a new one. And they're looking at me through the Espionage Act. Think of that. How does that sound? Of 1917, where the penalty is death.
Now, I will say that I talked to a number of sources who have spoken with him today, talked to members of his inner circle, who say that he was not pleased with what happened today, but he was encouraged watching that coverage afterwards, hearing legal pundits talking about how this was a weak case, and that Trump himself still believes what his lawyers are telling him, which is, again, that this is a weak case.